Imagine that we're in a workshop trying to identify what are the causes of the variation and dispersion in the thickness of your products. So you and some of the representatives of the different departments started to discuss what are the potential causes. So the first one came and say, let's call him John. So John came and say, you know what, the problem is with with the material that we use, and we need to have it replaced by a higher material quality. And then Smith came and say, no, it's about the supplier of the material that we use. The material is fine, but the supplier is not consistent with the quality of the material that he provides. And then Karen came and say, it's not about the supplier, it's not about the material itself, but rather it's about the packaging of the material. Because if we have the packaging of the material not up to standard, we have those quality issues with thickness later on. And then Andrew came and say, look, all of what you mentioned could be potential causes, but the problem is with how we store those materials in our warehouses, right? So our warehouses are not up to standard in terms of the temperature, humidity, and so on and so forth, and therefore we need to focus on this factor. And eventually, all came and say, see guys, I think the problem is with how we handle our material from our warehouses to our production lines. And because we are handling them inappropriately, you see those problems on the production lines and later on with customers. So what could you identify out of this exercise as a potential problem? One issue that we could see here is all of these people started talking about material and continued to talk about material, right? And there could be other factors unrelated to material, right? But when the first person started to talk about materials, the others unconsciously started to talk about the same thing, right? In the same time, there could be other potential causes related to machine, related to the equipment, related to process by which we machine our material, and that therefore affects the thickness. So how can we protect ourselves from leaning towards a specific category of causes and having this kind of bias while we discuss the potential causes of a specific problem? So one way to do it is using the Fishbone diagram. And the Fishbone diagram basically asks you to identify the categories, the key categories of causes before starting to identify the actual causes. So for example, just as a general rule, you would use what is called the 5M and 1E, right? And which is before you start talking about the causes, you start identifying the key categories, such as not necessarily those specific categories, but just for the sake of example or as a general rule, you can talk about man, machine, material, method, the measurement, and the environment. And this is why we are going to discuss this very important and actually one of my favorites problem solving tool. So let's go into the fishbone diagram.
So a fishbone diagram is a tool for identifying and analyzing the causes of any issue or a problem or an opportunity to exploit. So it's also known as the cause and effect diagram or an Ishikawa diagram. Now we know where this Ishikawa word came from. It is referring to Mr. Kaoru Ishikawa, who came up with this diagram. So the fishbone diagram has the following key components. So it includes a representation of the problem and also representation of the key categories that of the potential causes that can contribute to the problem, and we also have the specific causes and sub causes that are potentially contributing to the problem on hand. Okay, so the fishbone diagram can help us to visualize the relationship between the problem and its causes, and also identifying the root causes, and also encouraging brainstorming and team involvement in problem solving, and also preventing jumping to conclusions or blaming without evidence, as we spoke in the previous video. So what are the key steps in order to develop our fishbone diagram? So the first one is to identify the effect. Okay, so we have the cause and we have the effect, and the effect is the problem or the opportunity. Okay, and the second step would be to write the effect on the right hand side and left to the right arrow. Okay, we'll see about that in a moment. And the third step is to identify the major factors, categories that are potentially contributing to this specific issue. And the fourth is to write all factors and sub factors under each category. Okay, so 4 straightforward, easy steps. So how do I do it? We will go now through an example as if we are developing a fishbone diagram. Okay, and again, this example is from the Guide to Quality Control by Dr. Kaoru Ishikawa. So first is, here we have a problem, okay, which is called wobble. Okay, what do I need to do about it? So the first thing is to do is to write the issue in this box, okay, to the right hand side, and the second is to draw an arrow that will represent that there are some causes impacting this effect. Okay, so here we covered the effect or the issue, okay, or the problem, and then we will talk about here in the left hand side about the causes. Okay, the third step is to identify the key categories. So we can have this wobble problem based on causes coming from inspection, or this G resistor, or tools, or F resistor, or assembly. Okay, so before we jump and identify the judging, the workers, the axle, the cover, whatever, no, we identify first the key categories from which we can identify the causes and sub causes. Once we have identified the categories, we can easily go and identify the sub causes. Normally, when we develop such a diagram, the cause and effect diagram, it's better to consider two things. The first is to use brainstorming techniques in order to come up with all the potential causes possible. So you could expect that you have endless number of causes, and you have to motivate the people contributing to this brainstorming activity to come up with every potential cause, even though it seems ridiculous, but you have to come up with the all potential issues, and then later on a second stage we can evaluate them based on actual data one by one. So this is the first consideration. The second is what is called the YY technique. And the YY technique basically is a way to identify the root causes. So for example, if we talk about measurement, so measurement, okay, why do we have an issue with measurement here? Because for example, it is why we have an issue with our measurement, because we have an issue with measuring standard. And then you can go again and say, why do we have an issue with measuring standard? For example, you can say we don't have a regular a way to review our standards. Why we don't have a regular review of the standards? Because we are distracted by other things, for example, okay? Or this could not be a good cause, but you should be thinking of the sub causes using this YY technique until you identify the um, the key issues. So maybe for this measurement thing, we could identify eventually that we don't have the adequate equipment that will enable us to have an adequate measuring standard and then an adequate measurement. Okay, so this is basically how you would go about the developing a cause and effect diagram. It's a very easy tool. Everybody can use it. Any worker can use it. It's easy to demonstrate and easy to use, and it promotes a healthy discussion around the problem on hand. So now this is another example about um, an issue uh, related to improving interfacing between circles. So how can we improve this? So via people, via factory visits, via plays, via discussion, via contacts, and then we can think of the uh, other things that can contribute to the people factor, the factory visits, and so on and so forth. Um, Normally, people would use what is called the 5M and E, as we covered earlier in the first video about the cause and effect diagram. And these five categories are what they can call 5M and E. So man, machine, material, method, measurement, um, and environment. And um, you can use them as a starting point, but later on you can think of your own categories according to the issue on hand. So from this, we can summarize what can be the good uses and the potential benefits of using a cause and effect diagram. So the first is to use it as an educational tool for all participants. So it helps everyone understand the contributing factors to any issue. And the second is a guide for discussion, so that the discussion will not be dictated by a specific cause or a specific people. And the third is identification of root causes, so it helps us identify the causes and the potential sub-causes and eventually reaching out to the root causes. Also, it helps us with identifying documenting the identified causes, because if we encounter the same issue again, or if we come up with a similar opportunity, we can refer back to the same diagram as a starting point instead of starting from scratch. And also it helps us how well the team understands the process, because when people come around together to discuss the issue on hand or the problem on hand, we can figure out whether we could, like every contributor we're able to understand the issue, okay, and also to gain other perspectives on it. And finally, it can be used for any kind of issue or problem. So if it is, whether it is related to quality, it is related to cost, it's related to delivery, it's related to safety, it's related to morale. So the fishbone diagram can be easily used to target any of those issues or problems.